Welcome to Boss Talk. My name is Jim Parker. This is my business partner, Carey Sobel. We are in the business of helping people sell their businesses.
And on today's episode of Boss Talk, the topic is confidentiality and selling your business.
Extremely important topic.
I would definitely agree with that. I would say that almost every single seller that we work with, this is their biggest concern. This is the first point that comes up every single time. How are you going to protect confidentiality? And when you think about it, and you compare what we do in selling businesses to selling real estate, it couldn't be more different. Mm-hmm. Now, some of the process is similar, but we're not putting up a for sale sign on someone's business.
Exactly. You know, like a residential real estate agent, they put up a big sign and, they have all these signs out in the neighborhood, house for sale, open house, go this way. And commercial real estate agents, they put a 4-foot by 8-foot sign on the property.
Least.
They want everybody to know the house is for sale. Residential real estate agents, I've even seen those things that are blowing in the wind. Yeah. And they're trying to grab people's attention. And then they're, obviously they're advertising in magazines and, different kinds of websites and things like that. But absolutely, Carey, you're right. Selling a business, we want to keep it confidential.
And in the same sense, we want to get it out there to as many people as we can, but we want to do it in a confidential manner, whereas it's the opposite with selling a piece of real estate. So I guess it prompts the question, why do you have to protect confidentiality when selling a business? Why is that important?
It's important for a lot of reasons, but let's take employees, for example. Employees alone. Employees have to pay their rent or their mortgage. They got car payments, they got food. They're trying to support their family, and if they find out the business is for sale, they get concerned. Am I going to have a job? Mm-hmm. Whoever comes along and comes along and buys the business, are they going to keep me? So they get really concerned about that type of a situation.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, Carey, on the opposite side of that, buyers are always concerned, will the employees stay?
That's right.
And 99% of the time on the deal sizes that we do, the buyers want the employees to stay in the business and be there, but it's that unknown that employees have. Once you close on the sale of the business, and the business owner says, hey, I just want to let you know I'm getting ready for retirement. And, I've been spending the last several months looking for a perfect buyer to take over the business. And I think I've found that buyer. And I want to introduce you to that person, da-da-da-da. And the buyer steps forward and says, hey, I'm looking forward to working with you guys. A big part of the reason why I bought the business was because of you guys. And I'm looking forward to sitting down and chatting with you each one-on-one and seeing how we can improve the business and get to know you guys. The employees are okay at that point, but it's the unknown. Prior to that sale, who will that buyer be? Will they keep me? And that type of a situation.
And in most cases, we typically encourage a seller, stay focused on your business, don't tell the employees yet, and we have this kind of grandiose, after the deal is closed, meeting with the incoming buyer and the staff and the outgoing seller, and you get everyone together, and it's that moment where they find out for the first time they're working for somebody else. So it's scary for them. And in a perfect world, we would do it before, but it spooks people, right? Yeah. And you never want to throw a deal off track. So, there's some times prior to a closing or a sale, there may be key employees that are involved in the sale. There may be some employees that learn about it prior to, whether it's accidental or intentional. But we try to encourage it happening afterwards.
Yeah, I hardly ever want any employees to know that business is for sale until we actually get that business sold.
Yep.
And that's so key. And I'm proud to say that I've never had a breach of confidentiality in almost the 25 years that I've been selling businesses that happened on my end. I had one last year that there was a breach of confidentiality, and what happened was that the business owner was at a family wedding and he was talking to his cousin, and he goes, "Yeah, I'm thinking about selling my HVAC business," and da 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 da. And, the cousin didn't mean any harm, but, you fast forward a month later and the cousin called up the office and goes, hey, I need my HVAC, need my air conditioning fixed. And I don't know if so-and-so's still there. I know he was in the process of selling the business. No. Da, 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 da. And it was an employee that answered the phone. So, the business owners got to be very careful in themselves, not just telling their employees and, customers, and we're going to get into all that, but telling anybody the business is for sale, because things slip out that way.
Yeah. I'm doing a deal right now, and the seller intentionally told his staff that he's considering selling it. He's under LOI, he's about to sell it, probably in a month or so. The whole staff knows already. And he did that because the staff already knew that the owners were kind of checked out. They were actually feeling like they needed some more motivation. The seller was feeling like the staff needed some more motivation, so he took it upon himself to tell everyone that he's going through the process.
And in that situation, maybe that is the best thing to do. You know, because if the employees are sitting there thinking to themselves, hey, you know, the owner's kind of checked out, and really the business, I'm seeing the business being affected by this, and da-da-da-da, they'll probably breathe new light into the employees.
Absolutely.
You know?
Another example, I'm doing a deal right now, and there is a manager who is on the edge of retirement. And he's not the owner of the business, but he's kind of been there since day one from the business. And he told the business owner that he was looking to retire. This was prior to that business owner listing his business for sale with me. So he told me day one, the seller, that not only does the manager know about the sale coming up, but he said he would stay 6 months from the day that the business closes to help facilitate the closing.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And after the closing. So, you know, the seller or the owner of the business is actually excited to help him retire, but even more excited that he's going to be a part of that transition.
That's fantastic, because buyers, I mean, that's a big thing for a buyer. You know, you take a key employee like that, you know, buyers are like, is that employee going to stay post-closing? And, you know, if you're in a situation where that person may not stay, that could be a problem. You know, I've actually done deals where there was a key employee in the business, a very, very key employee, and they didn't know the business was for sale at all. But, you know, the sellers want to, a lot of times, take care of their key employees post-closing. And several times I've had situations where we have written into the asset purchase agreement or the stock agreement, depending on which way we went, that there would be a bonus for that key employee upon the sale of the business, but they would get that bonus 6 months, a year, or 2 years down the road.
Tying them to the business.
Tying them to the business. That way it makes the seller feel good, because they kind of want to reward the employee that helped them build the business, and it makes the buyer feel at ease, like, yeah, okay, that's going to be incentive to that employee to stay with the business post-closing.
Well, and it gives a little bit of time for that incoming buyer to show good faith that he's going to be a good business owner, and he's going to have continuity for the employees and take care of them, right? So that makes a lot of sense.
And what we did on those occasions when we do that, we usually tie that bonus, hey, if the employee stays there for, let's say, 12 months post-closing or 24 months post-closing, they get such and such bonus. If the employee does not stay for some reason, that money is donated to a charity.
Oh, that's great.
And
I've never heard of that.
And that way, there's no motivation for the buyer to be like, I'm firing this person on the 23rd month,
exactly.
You know, so that I can get the bonus.
Yeah.
Or the owner thinking that
they're going to get the money back.
They're going to get the money back. This way, it's going to a charity that the buyer and the seller agree upon, and there's no motivation on the buyer and seller's part at all. You know, what happens with that money. You know, it's either going to go to the employee or going to go to the charity.
I think that's a great idea. That's something that I feel like should be circulated to other people. It's sharing strategies like that that allow deals to get done better.
Yeah, it's worked out really nice.
You know, but when we talk about confidentiality, of course, it's not just for the staff. It's also for suppliers and vendors. You know, a lot of business owners have had relationships with some of their vendors and suppliers for decades. You know, and they like transacting with that business owner because the business owner treats their vendors well, and it's a great relationship. They don't know. It's the unknown that is always causing, you know, some issues with confidentiality and wondering what's going to happen, what if.
Yeah, so, and you've got to worry about suppliers and vendors too for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, you know, a supplier and vendor knows a business is for sale. They may say, oh, you know, that business is for sale. Should we have terms with them, or should we saying we need COD? You know, when we deliver the product, we need cash. I don't know if you're going to be here next week.
That's right.
You know, so and then that could hurt the cash flow of the business itself, because now they're not on any kind of terms if they're normally on terms.
Could negatively impact margins, distribution agreements, whatever it may be. So
and also you got to remember this: those suppliers and vendors are supplying products to and services to other of their competitors. You know, and if that falls through to the people that are doing the delivery, you know, and then they go and they're talking to a competitor and they're like, yeah, I heard so-and-so's got their business for sale.
And that happens a lot.
And that could happen.
Yeah.
You know, so you can't, keeping it under supply and vendors, and that goes right into why you don't want competitors to know the business is for sale.
Competitors is an important one. I mean, the first thing that a competitor is going to do if they know that another business is for sale is they're going to look at the clients that business owner typically serves, and they're going to reach out to them and say, they may not, you know, take the position of, hey, this business owner is selling, but they're going to start fielding
Yeah.
that lead and trying to get that business for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Competitor finds out a business is for sale, they could use that against them in the marketplace when they're trying to acquire clients and customers and things like that.
And they can just blame it on capitalism, right? We're just trying to make business.
And that goes into customers and clients.
Customers and clients is an interesting one. There's certain businesses that I think are greatly impacted when a business owner changes hands, right? Especially when it's a very small business, maybe not even small to medium-sized business. If I'm a customer and I go to a local chiropractor, and that chiropractor is directly involved in running that business, and that chiropractor is not going to be there anymore. I have only seen that one chiropractor. I haven't seen any of his associates or colleagues or any of the other people that work for it. I might want to go switch chiropractors. I may not give that business the same chance. I may go to another business.
Yeah.
But then there's other customers where confidentiality maybe doesn't mean as much. Maybe it's a very transactional type of business. You're just buying product. You don't have a relationship with a manager or an employee at that business where it's not that big of a deal.
But it could still affect, because I think that for some reason, and I don't know why this is, people think that if a business is for sale, the only reason why a business would be for sale is because it's a bad business.
Yep.
And I don't know why people think this, but they think that. Why would they sell it if it's a bad? Well, you think that, people do want to retire. Mm-hmm. People are going through divorces, or they have health issues, or spouses get offered jobs out of state. Sometimes the business owner has just burned out.
Yep.
The average burnout for a business owner is 7 to 10 years. There's a lot of different reasons why people want to sell, but for some reason, a lot of people are like, yeah, if a business is for sale, it's got to be a bad business, because why would they sell it? And that puts the mentality of the customers and clients like, who wants to go to a business where they think that business is struggling? If other people aren't going there, should I be going there?
It's a shame that that's the perception too, because I genuinely believe that it's very difficult for a business owner to realize that when your business is at its peak, it's typically a good time to sell your business, right? Not when it's failing, not when there's an issue, not when there's a challenge. A lot of times business owners don't realize that at your peak is when you might want to consider the sale of your business.
Exactly.
But for these other business owners, to your point, life changes are one of the biggest reasons why a business owner decides that they want to sell their business. Not because my business is doing great, I can get maximum value for it, I'm going to sell it. It's like you said, divorce, retirement, burnout, health issues.
Relocation, whatever it might be. Yeah.
But the general public, which is another part, what we're talking about, customers, general public, confidentiality comes into play, because that is the perception that the business is not doing great, and that's why the sellers sell.
I just got to say, I think when you're selling your business, confidentiality of the sale is so important. You should not tell your employees, customers, clients, vendors, suppliers, general public. You don't want your competitors to find out. Confidentiality is key, and that is what we really stress at Boss Group International. When we're selling businesses, we want to keep the sale of our businesses confidential so that your business is not affected. And we have a whole thing that we're going to be talking today about, me and Carey, on breaking down confidentiality even further and how we handle that and that type of a thing.
Perfect segue. Let's talk about how we protect a business, from a confidential standpoint. So I think the first thing is, or the most important point to talk about, is buyers. Mm-hmm. You put a business up for sale, and as we talk about, while we want a lot of buyers and attention to let people know that that business is an option to purchase, we have to do it confidentially. So when we are fielding leads from buyers knocking at the door and saying, I see this little teaser out here, this is a business I'm looking to buy, how are we protecting the business owner and that business from the thousands of buyers that are interested in buying a business?
You think about it, because we do it every day, but when you step back and you think about it, we are trying to sell something, and without anybody knowing what it is specifically that we're trying to sell. Yeah. We're trying to put it out there, try to get as much buyer interest as we possibly can. Obviously we want to get as much buyer interest as we possibly can in the business, because that is what is going to maximize the sales price. But we've got to do so in a way that nobody knows that it's that particular business that's for sale, or is able to guess which business it is for sale.
So on that point about guess, sometimes it can be one word that can give up what a business is. So I'm bringing a business to market today, and it's a restaurant, and that business is a very well-known restaurant in its area. Mm-hmm. So when we position a business for sale and we're trying to get information for buyers out there to think about that business being available, we do what's called a teaser or a business profile. And this is usually a one-page PDF that talks about that business but cannot give away the name of the business, the location of the business, or attributes about the business that will let buyers know what it is. So when we're doing that, and this business that I'm bringing to market, if I mentioned the neighborhood that it's in, and I mention the type of restaurant that it is, everybody will know immediately.
Yep.
So we have to say Central Florida instead of the particular neighborhood. And we want to say a general restaurant instead of a breakfast restaurant, which is what it is, right? So we just have to be really careful in the way that we do our jobs. We have to be surgical and think about it from a buyer's perspective, and maybe a buyer's perspective that actually lives in the area of where the business is for sale.
You know, I actually had one time a fine jewelry store owner that wanted to sell their business, and I don't sell jewelry stores. Selling jewelry stores is a very difficult sale because it's very inventory heavy.
That's right.
You know what I mean? It's a type of business where usually the jewelry in a fine jewelry store is very astronomical,
and worth more. It's worth more than the goodwill.
It's worth a lot more than the goodwill, and a lot of times for a fine jeweler, it's better for them just to go liquidate the jewelry instead of going through the sales process.
Good point.
So I don't sell fine jewelry stores, but I had a gentleman come across one time, and he wanted to sell his jewelry store, and I told him that, and he goes, but this was my grandfather started it, and then my dad owned it, and now I own it, and I want that legacy to go on. And I'm like, wow. The business had been in business for like 97 years, Carey, 97 years. And I told the owner, I go, look, the chances of you selling your business is very, very slim. And I don't sell jewelry stores, and most brokers won't because of this reason. But boy, I would love to have a feather in my cap of saying, when I end my career, that I sold a business that I'm in business for 97 years. And so anyways, we took it to the market. Unfortunately, we never sold it, but I told the seller up front it was a Hail Mary. Yep. But, that was a thing. If we would have put 97 years in there, how long it was for sale, because every place asks how long.
Somebody Googles it.
Yeah. They don't even have to Google it. Like all the jewelry stores in the greater state area knew who that was. They would have been able to guess who it was.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very large, very, very successful jewelry store. And so that kind of stuff. And I've got one right now. It's a business that is in a smaller area of Florida, and if I'm very concerned about putting the county, because in a lot of the places that we market and advertising, they're asking what the county is. And if I put the county, people are going to be able to guess.
Because it's so small.
Because it's so small.
Yeah.
So we're putting a neighboring county in there to kind of throw it off a little bit. So, like the jewelry store, we said, I think we put it out there that had been in business for like 20 years. Sometimes we have to kind of fudge the public with the stuff we put out to the public, but I never exaggerate it higher or better. Yep. I minimize it, because if you say something was in business longer than it really was, or something like that, you're exaggerating or puffing that,
and you'll have to pull it back later on.
Where we're minimizing, where the seller and then buyer sees and they're like, oh, it is 99 years, that's cool, or 97 years, that's great, that's more, it makes it even better. But we do have to sometimes throw things off so people can't guess which business is for sale. And a lot of times the things we do want to get across, because it is such a big selling point in selling the business, we can't do it in public form.
Right. And, buyers and protecting buyers from understanding what the business name is or what the business is kind of the first level of priority.
Right.
So assuming we've done everything that we need to do to list a business, prepare it for sale, confidentially be ready to market the business, we set it live, the listing's out there, people are knocking at the door, they want to know what that business is. The first thing that we do to protect confidentiality once a business is live and on the market is using non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, for buyers that are looking to purchase a business. Now, an NDA is a legally binding contract. There are ramifications if you violate the NDA. Yeah. But that's kind of the first step.
Yeah,
right?
And the confidentiality agreement is just basically saying that, a couple things. You're not going to tell anybody that the business is for sale. They're going to be disclosing the name of the business, and you cannot tell anybody the business is for sale. And you cannot use any information that you're gathering from from the business to be able to compete against them.
That's right.
You know, so that does give the buyer the option though to share information with the professionals around them to help them make the decision moving forward. You know, whether it's their financial advisor like a CPA or a business attorney or something like that, they do have the option, and the confidentiality agreement does give them the ability to seek out the professionals they need to do it, but not just telling people the business is for sale. And they can't even tell like their best friend.
Yeah.
You know, they can't be telling, they can't be telling people. And if it's multiple partner type of situation where there's going to be a couple people buying it, each and every one of those people should be signing the confidentiality agreement as well as being pre-screened as a buyer.
And when we're doing the NDAs, I think a sign that is typically foreshadowing an issue down the road is when that buyer has an issue with the NDA.
Yeah.
Right? And we'll talk about, so we sell a lot of businesses from Main Street to M&A, but typically we sell business between $1 and $10 million in gross sales. And when there is a private equity group or somebody that is a larger institutional buyer, they're typically asking, I wouldn't say typically, but we get a lot of times where they're asking to redline an NDA. Let's set that aside for a second.
Right.
If you have average buyer that is arguing some of the terms in an NDA, we're making the assumption from the beginning it's going to be pretty hard to get an LOI or an asset purchase agreement or a contract signed if they're arguing the NDA just to get the general information about the business.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, look, the confidentiality agreement that we use is a one-page for the individual, not for the private equity group.
Right.
We'll get into that. But the individual buyer that's looking, it's a one-page confidentiality agreement. And the one that we use, almost every business broker in the state of Florida uses, as well as every other business broker in the country uses very similar language.
That's right.
So it's a very standard agreement, or the concept is a very standard situation. And it's very basic as well. And you hit it right on the head, Carey. I totally agree with you. I've seen situations where a buyer comes back to me and they've redlined a few things that they want changed. And I have to call them and explain to them why we can't change those things and da-da-da-da-da. And a lot of times the buyer will be like, oh, nope, I understand. We can move forward. But you get that buyer sometimes it's like, oh no, well I'm not going to sign it if you don't do this and you don't do that and da-da-da-da-da. And they're trying to negotiate this one-page confidentiality agreement. And if a buyer cannot sign a one-page confidentiality agreement, we're going to have major problems. Look, to get from the start of buying a business to get to the end of buying a business, there's so many little steps that we need to do throughout the entire process to get from here to get to here. And if we're over here with a one-page agreement and they can't get on board with that, every time something comes up, whether it's a contract or not, they're going to want to step outside of what's the normal way of doing it. And every time a buyer steps out of that normal way of how the process of selling a business goes, it's threatening the chances of getting that deal done. So that I already know right off the bat that buyer is going to be the kind of buyers who want to do everything their way. They're going to do it that way. And there's a reason why, as intermediaries, we guide the process a certain way. And every time you step outside of that normal way, chances of the business being sold greatly decreases. And when you're talking about odds of businesses being sold, that 80 to 90% of the businesses being sold do not sell, and that 50% of the deals that go under contract fall apart before the closing table, those are big statistics. That's what we do not want to have happen. Now, we sell about 90% of the businesses we take to the market. But the other thing is, Carey, if they can't sign a one-page listing, a one-page confidentiality agreement, are they going to be able to sign a 15-page asset purchase agreement or a 40, 50, 60-page closing documents, or a stock sale, a 60-page stock sale, or an SBA loan that's going to be, that thick? I mean, it's going to be a problem.
Yep. And we started mentioning private equity or institutional buyers. There's a lot of groups that are doing what's called bolt-ons or strategic acquisitions, or something to where if a private equity firm is heavy in plumbing, home services plumbing, and they're trying to go around town and buy other plumbing businesses to make their business bigger, they are probably the group that is going to look at the NDA and they are going to redline it, and they're going to have several concerns and adjustments that need to be made because they own a portfolio of businesses in the same industry.
You're absolutely right.
So those cases where there's a redlined NDA, we're probably a little bit more willing to negotiate some of those terms or discuss changes on the NDA. But if it's not an institutional buyer, we're really not manipulating the NDAs.
Absolutely. I mean, the one-page confidentiality agreement, that's for the individual buyer. We have a separate confidentiality agreement that we use for private equity groups. I can't remember. It's like 3 or 4 pages long. So it's a lot longer of a confidentiality agreement. But you're exactly right. The private equity groups and institutional buyers will sometimes step forward and say, hey, can we change this? Can we change that? And you know what? We know, for the most part, what things that they're going to want to change. Yep. And we know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And we know how private equity groups work. They know how we work. We respect each other. You're not usually asking to change anything that's really, really going to hurt the seller at the end of the day. They just want to protect themselves. We understand that. So in those scenarios, we know what things they typically want to change, and we're more flexible on that.
And the reason why. They have a valid reason.
Yes.
And, the second step...
Valid reason, you're absolutely right.
Second step, I think, because we have to get under NDA first to talk, but really the second step in protecting confidentiality, especially when we're working with Main Street buyers or even lower to middle market M&A, is going through a qualification for that buyer. So buyers sign an NDA and they say, give me the information about the business. Hold on a second, we're going to take it a step further. We're going to make sure that that buyer has the funds or the means to acquire that business. They can actually move forward and make a purchase, that they're not just shopping around, they're not just kicking tires, they're not ghost shopping or secret shopping as a competitor of that business owner. So the financial qualification is a huge part. And we were talking about kind of you show me, I'll show you. Mm-hmm. So when a buyer is saying, I want that information about a business, we're saying, okay, well, first you're going to give us a little bit of information about you. You signed an NDA, you told us that you're going to respect the confidentiality of this, but are you for real? Mm-hmm. Do you actually have the means to move forward with this? Tire kickers is a term we use a lot in our industry.
Most buyers are tire kickers, unfortunately.
Buyers are liars, buyers are tire kickers. Yeah. And I hate to say that, but it's the truth. And I think one of the most challenging parts of our job is weeding through the buyers, right? You put a business on market, you get 50 NDAs on it, everybody wants the information about it. We need to be selective in who we're going to allow to see information about that business, but we're also protecting our time and our seller or business owner's time.
Yeah.
We don't want to just set up meetings with everybody and get everyone talking and spreading it. So
and even releasing information, because at that point we will be giving the name of the business to the and giving inside information about the business to those buyers. So we got to make sure that those buyers are serious, qualified buyers for that business, because the last thing we want to do is start letting people know. I mean, we're doing all we can up front, Carey, in the advertising and the marketing to get the interest from buyers. We're trying to protect the confidentiality of the seller. That's that business, that's particular business is for sale. Now, as these buyers are coming in, we don't want to be just giving information to every buyer that's inquiring about the business and giving the name of the business. It could be a competitor that's just shopping, that has no interest in buying a business. They're just like, oh, somebody near me is selling their business that's like mine. I want to find out what competitor it is.
Every one of those buyers or every individual or group that learns about the business is one more opportunity for that business to be unveiled for breach of contract.
Yep.
So, a lot of times...
Breach of confidentiality.
That's right. One of the things I'm dealing with right now, which is a good example, is when you ask a buyer to show us either a personal financial statement, proof of funds, or a bank letter that they've been approved by their bank to get financing, sometimes they get offended by it, but we're really just trying to do our jobs, and we will not typically disclose any information about it unless we financially qualified one. I have a buyer right now that will not give me any financial information about them in order to find out even the name of the business. Now, this is not a private equity group. It's not an institutional group. It's probably a high net worth individual, I would think. Mm-hmm. But what if it's not a high net worth individual and it's somebody that doesn't have any damn money?
And they're not qualified to run the business or whatever. And that's a scary thing that most buyers. I would say that most buyers are good, and they know and they understand. Hey, I'm looking to buy a business. I have to give this information to myself about the broker in order to get that information, and they understand that. But we do run into those buyers that do not understand that maybe they're new buyers hitting the market for their first time, and they're just looking at it like, they're buying, hey, I want to buy a business. You don't need to know anything about me at all.
Yeah.
You're trying to sell the business. I just want the information on the business. And you have to sit there and you have to explain to this buyer, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but remember, we got to protect the confidentiality and blah, blah, blah. Well, I signed the NDA and I'll keep it quiet. Yeah. But understand that we have to make sure that we pre-screen, because we don't want everybody in the world to know that, like you said before, every time somebody knows the name of the business, that's one more close chance of it getting out there that it's that business for sale, and we got to protect that. And it's not just protecting our time and the seller's time, but it's protecting the buyer's time.
That's right.
Sometimes you talk to a buyer and they're looking at buying this business, and you're like, you're not going to be able to buy that business from a financial standpoint. You need something that's smaller, or you don't have the experience or the expertise to run that business. Maybe we can find you something else that better matches your skills.
And on the point of experience, which I want to get to next, but first I want to say, on that one example that I was giving, this buyer, this independent buyer, sent me a 4-page DocuSign confidentiality agreement that I needed to sign and the seller needed to sign in order to just continue the conversation. And, I started laughing because I go, first of all, this business is getting a ton of attention. So many people are interested in it. We have LOIs on the table. We have APAs on the table. Buyer-seller meetings are set up. And this guy is going back and forth with me on phone calls and emails for a week, trying to get me to sign a DocuSign and the seller to sign a DocuSign of a 4-page confidentiality agreement just for me to see their financial picture.
That's some red flags. That goes back to what I was saying earlier, that there's a lot of steps we need to go through to sell a business, and if that person's doing that, they're going to be very hard and difficult to work with throughout the entire process, and it's going to be very hard to get to the closing table.
So, question for you: do you think I signed it?
No.
I did.
You did?
I did.
Okay.
I signed it, and I'm actually meeting with that person today with the business owner.
Oh, wow. Hey.
I didn't have the business.
Tell me how that goes.
I didn't have the business owner sign the NDA, but I did. I did some deep research into this person, and I do think it could be a good fit. I was frustrated with the process, but ultimately, it's our job to do everything we can to sell the business.
Well, Carey, absolutely. And the thing is like,
it's the first time I've ever done that. By the way,
it's hard to do a blanket statement. You know what I mean? It's hard to say the fast rules. You kind of have to go with your gut in every transaction, with every buyer, with every seller, to adjust things, because there's probably a reason why you felt that buyer might be a really good buyer, even though they were doing that, and that's why you went ahead and did it.
It was gut. You're 100% right. And I didn't want to do it, one, because I wanted to be right, and I wanted to say, hey, we're going to sell this thing whether I sign this or not. But I ended up doing it, and I don't know where it'll go, but I'll be sure to keep you posted on that one.
Carey, it goes back to this. When I get multiple offers in on a business, and a lot of times I do, obviously we're looking at the price. We're looking at the terms, and obviously that's a big decision in there. But also the conversations that I'm having with the seller is, how likely are we going to be able to get this buyer to the closing table? And a lot of times that plays a big part. And sometimes when a buyer is very, very, very difficult up front, they tend to be very, very difficult once we go under contract, and it makes it harder to actually get the transaction done. So that's what we're also looking at when we have multiple offers, and I think buyers should realize that as well, because the whole thing is that prior to that offer being signed, it's the seller that has control. Once it goes under contract or goes under an LOI, the buyer now has control. So that's like when you're looking at multiple offers, that's the seller's time at that point to say, okay, who is going to be the best person to work with to get to the closing table? Who's most likely going to get to the closing table? Who am I going to want to work with post-closing in a transition period of time? And who's going to best be able to take over my legacy of what I've created and I've built? And that's on top of the price and terms. So there's a lot of different things that sellers and myself look at when we are looking at multiple offers, not just price and terms. And I think buyers should realize that it's the whole kind of ball of wax thing for a seller.
Yep. And continuing on with confidentiality, we've talked about signing an NDA or a CA to find out about the business. We typically then do a financial qualification. But there's another step that we take. In the qualification of a candidate to learn about a business being available for sale is experience. Just because somebody has the means to acquire a business and they have signed a CA or an NDA to get information about the business doesn't mean that they are the best candidate for the business from an experience standpoint. For example, I sell a lot of restaurants. And there's a lot of times where there's somebody who has rolled over a 401k. Maybe they worked at an institutional firm or a white-collar job for a while, and they said, you know what, I want to get in the restaurant business. I'm gonna jump into this, and I'm gonna throw some of my life savings into opening up a restaurant. First of all, I tell them to run as far the opposite way as they possibly can. But we need to make sure that incoming buyer has enough experience, whether it's in the same industry or a degree in college or experience, to where they could actually take the business on and successfully run it. So we are going to also qualify buyers from an experience standpoint before unveiling any information about the business. And I do see a lot of brokers that don't do that. They get an NDA, they don't even care about the financials. Here's all the information.
Or their experience, and here's all the information.
Let's talk about the experience part.
Well, I do. I want to kind of elaborate what you said on the restaurant, because I think that's fascinating for me, and I've always said this, that somebody that's got a lot of really good business experience, that is a good business person, can operate almost any kind of business out there. Except for a restaurant. I feel like a restaurant is a completely different animal. Like, I don't think you could take somebody that has a lot of great business experience, put them in a restaurant, they'd necessarily be successful, or vice versa. I mean, they're two totally different animals. But sometimes the experience too it depends on the business. I mean, I sell a lot of different kinds of businesses, but I sell a lot of blue collar type businesses. And, sometimes we're looking for a buyer that has direct experience in that particular industry. And sometimes we look at it and go, somebody doesn't have to have direct experience in that industry because how the business operates. Somebody that has a lot of great business background, managerial experience, somebody coming from the corporate business world that has done really well for themselves probably could take this business and take it to the next level. But it depends on how that business is currently operating. Do we need somebody that has direct experience in that industry, or could we actually get somebody that has really good business experience that would be very successful running that business? And the SBA, and the SBA lenders, they look at it that same way.
That's one of their main qualifications is experience. Sometimes they may be on the edge of being able to financially qualify, but let's say they're buying an electrical business, and they've been an electrician for 20 years, and now they're going, I want to jump into this and run it myself because I've been a manager at an electrical business. I hold my electrical license. I know how to actually do the thing. And now I want to go do it myself. If that buyer maybe is not strong enough to get a deal done, but not super strong financially, if they have that background and experience, they have a chance of getting qualified.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the flip side of that, the opposite side of that is that, maybe you don't need the direct experience, like I was saying, in that industry. It all comes down to what is the current owner's role in the business? What is the current owner doing in that business? What's their job responsibilities? What's their day-to-day job duties? If they're more of a business person at this point, like they take electrical company, they've done all the electrical stuff all their lives, and about 10 years ago, they stopped doing it for their own company, and they've become more of a business person at this point. They're handling more of sales, and they're handling more of, meetings and scheduling and things like that. Then you may not necessarily need somebody that has a lot of experience actually doing electrical work. If they've got strong managerial experience and they have some knowledge of construction or something like that, it could work. And
it could actually be an advantage for that business that was operating before. Maybe the owner of the business, it's two men in a truck type of deal, where it's a guy that owns the business, operates the business, and does the thing in the business.
That's a different story.
Staying on electrical. So if that person is actually going out and doing the electrical work, and then there's a person that comes in that may have some experience in electrical but is better at running a business than doing the thing,
right?
They can come in and take that business to a whole nother level by not coming in to be a good electrician, but to be a good business owner that may understand the electrical business.
Right, exactly.
And when we talk about confidentiality moving down the road, and kind of in my head what we're doing right now is going from, okay, business is on the market, how do we protect it? Now we're trying to speak to buyers and talking about how we're protecting them from buyers. Let's say we're under contract now with a buyer, a buyer and a seller. Buyer.
Can we stay on pre-screening real quick? Is
Yeah,
that okay? Yeah. Because we talked about. I just want to get all the things because we talked about them signing the confidentiality agreement. We talked to them about their experience or their background, education, skill set. Obviously there's a financial situation. Did we talk about the financial?
We did.
We did. Okay, then maybe I'm missing something.
It's early.
But I think the motivation is also a big thing.
That's a good
I
point.
look at is how motivated the buyer is to actually buy a business. And I know that sounds silly, but that's what you have to look at. And how long have they been looking? And it's okay if they've been looking for 3 months or 2 years, but I at least want to get an idea of how long they've been looking, what kind of business they looked at, why haven't they moved forward with anything, and I want to know at the end of the day, are they going to pull the trigger on a business, and actually acquire the business? Like if I'm talking to a business, I'm talking to a buyer. And they're making $300,000 a year in their current job in the corporate world, and they have a stay-at-home spouse, and they have 3 kids, and they have a 401k plan and a dental plan and health insurance. I'm going to be having these conversations with them. Like at the end of the day, are you going to be able to take that jump and actually acquire a business? Because you've got young kids, you've got a spouse that's not working. You've got all the benefits and you're making a high salary.
Why do you want to buy
Why do you want to buy a business? What is your thing? And they might like, I've dreamed about it and blah, 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 blah. And this is more of a gut thing than, finances and education and training and all that. You can kind of get more down. The motivation thing is more of a gut thing that we have to go with. But, that conversation with them in that situation is extremely important. Why do you want to acquire a business? Are you going to be able to actually make that jump and pull that trigger at the end of the day? Is your spouse on board with this? And then if they're like, oh yeah, no, my spouse is, it's a red flag. You know what I mean? But if they're like, hey, no, my spouse is right on board with me. We review everything together. This is our dream. They're going to work in the business as well as the kids get older. Blah 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 blah. Those are the conversations we have to have as well.
So that's good motivation, right? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
What is a type of motivation that is not appropriate or that would make you refrain from divulging information after a CDA is signed or qualification has been done on?
So they met finance. You saying they signed a confidentiality agreement?
Everything's
they
done.
Financially can afford it. They got the experience and education to buy it. They could run the business. But
what's a bad motivation at that point?
I think a big one would be that the scenario that I just told you. A spouse not being on board necessarily with the sale of the business, or the purchase of a business. I think that would be a red flag, for instance.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That'd be huge.
So let's talk a little bit more about continuing going down the process of selling and how we're protecting confidentiality. Let's say we're under contract now.
Mm-hmm.
What is some information that would come out during due diligence after we're under contract that may not come out prior? What type of information that we're sharing?
Yeah, a lot of times, buyers are asking for things like, prior to an accepted offer, they're asking for things like the tax returns of the business. That's a really common one. Hey, can I see the tax returns of the business? No, you cannot. and the thing is like what we do is we're taking all the numbers off of a tax return and we're putting them on the spreadsheet. So the buyer can see the actual numbers, the gross sales, all the expenses, the other deductions, the adjustments that were made. We're copying the gross sales and the expenses directly from a tax return. They're on there, but a buyer would be like, well, I want to see it for myself. I want to see the actual tax return. We can't do that. We start passing out, because there's a lot, corporate tax returns, there's a lot of personal information in there, and we don't want to start passing out those tax returns to every buyer that's inquiring. As a buyer, you got to look at that spreadsheet and say, I trust that those numbers were copied directly off of a tax return. And you got to understand that once we go under contract, that is the point that the business tax returns would be handed over to you, and at that point you can match up and make sure that they match, and if they don't, you can break the contract and no big deal. That's part of due diligence.
Right.
But you, as a buyer, you've got to take that faith that they are actually copied off that, and you just got to understand we can't just start passing tax returns to everybody. I mean, ask yourself as a buyer, like, would you want us to get your tax returns and then pass them around to 30, 40 different people? I'm sure you don't. So we want to protect that situation.
Aside from tax returns, I think a big common ask in due diligence is merchant statements.
Due diligence or before?
Bank statements. No, in due diligence.
Yeah.
So, this is where, when you're in due diligence, it's pretty much open. There's a list of items that you don't get in due diligence that maybe you get afterwards. But when you're in due diligence, you're sharing what you're trying to do is validate the information in due diligence that we have provided on the front end. You were talking about a recast where we essentially take the information, true information from the seller's financial statements or tax returns, and we put it in a digestible format, but not giving out the document that has their social security number and their home address and stuff like that.
So prior to contract, we got to basically tell the buyer, you got to trust this.
Yep.
And then once we go under contract, you verify it.
Correct.
And
trust but verify. Then when you're verifying, you're seeing merchant statements, POS sales, bank statements, tax returns,
sometimes
P&Ls.
copies of the QuickBooks themselves.
Yep.
I mean,
general
there's
ledgers.
a whole lot of lists, and that's the opportunity that the buyer, for the first time, is getting the curtain lifted up, and they're making sure that the numbers have been presented to them are true and accurate.
Yep.
And the lender's going to go even one step further. They're going to have the seller sign off on a form that gives the buyer, they're going to have a seller sign off on a form that they're going to send to the IRS so that they can get the transcripts of the seller's tax returns for the last couple of years so that they know that they were actually filed with the IRS. So the tax returns that we actually gave the lender were the ones that were actually filed with the IRS.
Unfortunately, people have fake tax returns sometimes, and it's scary, but I think that form is a 4506 form.
Yep, it is.
So, it's verification up until the point where you have enough trust to move forward and do a deal. But even when you're under contract and you're through a due diligence period, there are things that are still redacted or that the buyer does not get information for, is not privy to. Some of those things are staff names or staff lists, vendor names or vendor lists, client lists or customers of the business. Like, we typically keep those things close until a deal's done, because a deal could fall apart. And if that buyer is full of it and really not having the desire to close, maybe they were never doing this for the right reasons. They were doing it to get all the information about a competitor. These are some of the things that we still need to protect. What some other things that you think that, like standard operating procedures, intellectual property?
Yeah. And I hate to do this, Carey. I want to step back one more time on that tax return thing, because I think you said something that was really critical.
Okay.
That tax returns can be, a seller could give a false tax return to a buyer. And there's been a couple times in my career where I've sat down with a seller, or a seller's given me their financials, and I'm looking at tax return and I'm like,
this doesn't add up.
There's something wrong. Just the way it's put. I mean, look at tax. I can't do a corporate tax return, but I see enough of them that a couple of times I've seen red flags where I'm like, this looks like somebody, because you can remember at the end of the day, you could go on Google up 1120S form, print out a tax return, and start filling in numbers and hand that to a broker or hand that to a buyer. And, for the buyers out there, you've got to do your due diligence. You go under contract, you can't just, let me see your tax returns. Oh, okay, the tax returns look good. And even if you get the 4506 form signed and you get a transcript sent directly from you, from the IRS, of those tax returns, you got to do your due diligence. You want to get the bank statements, the merchant service statements. You want to gather all that financial information, even hire a CPA if you want to go through and cross-reference all that to make sure that what is being claimed is actually being claimed. Don't take the tax return as the holy grail at the end of the day. You just don't do it. And I'm going to go back to saying, in the beginning, when a buyer's asking for a tax return before we go under contract, and they're like, let me see the tax return, because they want to feel like, I really want to see it. I'm saying, well, it's on a spreadsheet, and here's the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
They got to understand that I can hand you that. It could still not be right. Like, that is what due diligence is about. So I'm sorry, God. I just wanted to regress because I think that's really important.
And I've probably only seen something like that one time in my career so far, but all it takes is one time to be scarred, and all it takes is one time to make sure that this is now something we're going to tell every single one of our sellers and change the way we do our business to continue to protect.
Yeah, thank God. Like I it's more I want to talk about to buy because I don't know, dealing with a seller like that, I'd just be like, I wouldn't know
hopefully
what to do.
we have done our job in the beginning, judging their character, looking at the information that they sent to us and provided to us, and say, yeah, this looks accurate.
Yeah.
But
we're not doing due diligence at the end of the day.
No.
We're not sitting there going through their bank statements and the merchant service statements, matching everything up, cross-referencing it. That's not our job. We can't put ourselves out there in that kind of liability. That's what a buyer should be doing on their own or doing with, the assistance of a financial advisor or a CPA or something like that. And that due diligence period is so, so critical.
Yep.
So I'm sorry we got off subject. So what was your question about?
We were just talking about some of the things that still don't even become available in due diligence.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think...
Like a client list.
A client list is probably one of the most important.
Yeah, it is.
A buyer's coming in to buy a business. I'll just give you a scenario. Buyers coming in to buy a business, they do have intent to actually acquire a business. Something falls apart in that business transaction. They don't actually end up acquiring the business. They now have a list of all of the employees that work there, all of the customers that work there, the operating procedures of the business, how they do their thing.
And that's what we're trying to protect is so that they're not in that situation. So you take let's take a lawn or landscape business and they've got 1,500 clients.
That's a big business.
And they're the buyer saying, hey, I want to see the client list. And you hand over, you can't hand over the names, addresses, how much each customer is paying for 1,500 clients. You know what I mean? That's something that they should not get until the closing table. Now, I can understand that a buyer wants to, maybe gather some information from seeing that customer list, but the best thing to do in that case is to do a blind list. So a blind list is basically you're taking the customer list and you're keeping how often they're doing the service, how much they're being charged for the service, how long they've been with doing it, maybe the general geographical area that customer or client's located in, but the name of the customer, their address, or any contact information has been extracted, and that's called a blind customer list or blind client list, and that is appropriate to give during the due diligence period. But there's no way that a seller should give a client list to a buyer, and there's no reason why a buyer would need to know that in the space that we work. In deals that are selling for $50, $100 million, and you're working with major corporations, that might turn into a different kind of a scenario, but there's more protection in there anyways because it's the goodwill that's been built up between them. But I don't want to go down that road. So client list is a big one.
And back on that example is if that transaction didn't end up happening and they get all that information, now they still are under NDA. So if they go start trying to poach clients and poach vendors, whatever it may be, there are ramifications of that. And unfortunately, it's a crazy world out there. Not everybody has the best intentions.
No,
so
they don't.
They could take all of that stuff and go start their own business from scratch, reach out to all of those customers and undercut them.
And you don't want to put the seller in a position where they have to then sue the buyer, and then it costs all that money for legal fees and the time that's going to be spent to do that. The best thing is just that should not be provided.
That's right.
And then what can do is you take that blind list and maybe you number them, 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 blah. And then post-closing, even before post-closing, that customer list could be given to if there's an escrow attorney or an attorney of some, well, it's obviously going to be an attorney of some sorts in the thing, it could be given to an attorney and it's held in escrow. And on the signing, on the day of signing, then the client list is sent over. Because sometimes buyers are like, well, how do I know I'm going to get that client list, post-closing? Well, you're going to get it. That you're buying the business.
Yeah.
But to make the buyer feel good, the list is not blind. The true list could be put in escrow with the attorney. So the attorney already has that, but the buyer doesn't have access to it. The brokers don't have access to it.
Anything else that we should talk about just from the due diligence aspect that maybe you don't get? Because I want to talk about, some general other confidentiality tactics that we use in our practice just to protect the deal.
I know, just the little things. I don't think it's a good idea to be giving over employees' social security numbers and that type of a thing. protection there. So there are things that, look, I want a buyer to have the ample resources and have the ample information in order to do the necessary due diligence or quality of earnings, whatever they're doing, so that they can make sure that the business is doing what the seller is claiming it's doing. And I want it to be that way. I want a buyer to be feeling really good about it when they go to the closing table. But at the end of the day, there are going to be some things that don't directly affect that stuff that needs to be held back until after closing, and it's not going to affect the due diligence process.
Yep.
And those are the conversations that we have to have with the buyer, and that's the things that buyers need to understand.
I think another thing that we do that has just been kind of a common practice is when we're doing a showing for a business, or a buyer is typically not going to buy a business without visiting the brick and mortar location if it exists, or the warehouse if it exists.
See the equipment, see the location and things like that.
So after we get down the road, typically once we're maybe under contract or under LOI, we'll have a buyer-seller meeting on site. We always do that during non-operative hours, or when the employees are not there, on a weekend perhaps.
At night, in the morning, first thing in the morning before the business opens.
So, I always wear the hat if I'm going to a business, if I already have the listing for the business and I'm going back and some of the employees see me coming in there, I'm typically the insurance guy.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I wear the insurance guy hat.
I got a funny story. I did that for years. And then one time I had an employee that was just asking me insurance questions. And I was a deer in the headlights. I was like, because I thought insurance was the most boring thing. No offense to people that do insurance, but for the people that don't do insurance, it's not something that people get excited about or typically want to engage in, And I said, oh yeah, I sell insurance, and started asking me a bunch of questions. I was like, well, I only do commercial insurance, and she's like, oh yeah, but my husband owns a business and and he's looking for commercial insurance. I'm like, oh my, and I knew she wasn't trying to fish. I think I truly believe that she really wanted to talk to me about insurance.
That's hilarious.
So, I try to use the payroll thing now.
Payroll's a good one.
Payroll.
Yeah, we
I'm a
wear a lot
payroll
of
company,
hats.
and
That's good. We have to wear a lot of hats in this business. I never thought payroll would be one, but that's a good idea. I might start switching to that from insurance. But yeah.
So when we're having the buyer-seller meeting, that's happening before hours, after hours, on the weekends, when the business is closed. What me and Carey were talking about is when we're in a situation where we're meeting the seller during the week. The seller wants to meet us during the week, prior to sale or during the sale process or something like that.
A lot of times when we do a site tour, we'll go to the location, regardless of whether employees are there or not. We'll do the site tour, we'll walk around, we'll look at the equipment, we'll look at the aspects of the business, and then we'll go down the road to a coffee shop and sit down and talk. So we're just doing everything that we can to try to protect the confidentiality of the business as in any corner that we turn, any aspect and step of the many steps in the business, anything that we can do to protect confidentiality.
And it depends on the business, and it depends, there's a lot of things in there. So that's something we talk to the seller about. It's the best way to handle the showing and how the seller feels comfortable, or, that nothing's going to be broken out. We give our advice too and things like that. And one of the things I do too is even if we're meeting after hours, when there's no employees there, let's say the meeting's at, 7 o'clock in the evening. And at this point, we're having that meeting at 7 o'clock at night.
For a reason.
We've already had, a conversation. They've already seen the SIM, the NDA. We've answered a lot of their questions. They've already talked to the seller, by phone at least one time. I mean, we're getting to the point where, there's a good chance if that meeting went well, the buyer's going to put an offer in.
Yep.
I don't want to jump just to a buyer-seller in-person meeting right off the bat. I think I want to save the buyer time. I want to save the seller's time. But when we get to that point, let's say we're meeting there at 7 o'clock in the evening. We're meeting at that time because nobody's going to be there. But I always tell the buyer, don't show up before 7 o'clock. Don't show up at 6:30 or quarter to 7. Show up at 7 o'clock. And then call me before you pull into the parking lot. And then I try to show up about quarter till 20 till the meeting, and I'll call the seller and I'll just make sure, hey, I just want to make sure nobody's there, Because once in a while, an employee's working late or a crew's coming back late from a job, and the owner can be like, oh yeah, no, yeah, I'm waiting for, a guy's going to be coming in and shortly. Okay, great. So I'm down the street. I'll pull over at a 7-Eleven or a gas station down the road, and then I'll call the buyer, hey, don't go yet. So it's letting everybody know, hey, things are clear. Hey, is it okay? Nobody's there? Nobody's here. All right, thanks, Mr. or Mrs. Seller. And then call the buyer and say, okay, everything's good. We'll just meet, and I meet the buyer in the parking lot, and then I walk in.
This is a case where if you're not early or late does not apply.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Don't show up early.
So overall, the theme I think that we're trying to get across today is that confidentiality is an incredibly important part of helping sell a business. We understand how important it is. We're former business owners ourselves. We understand, the ramifications of confidentiality being violated, people knowing that a business is for sale. So we do everything we can to protect this. We want to ensure you that if you're considering the sale of your business, that at Boss Group, we do everything we can to make sure that it remains private and confidential.
And we've never had an issue, knock on wood, breaking the confidentiality from our doing and what we're doing. I gave that story earlier about, the wedding and the cousin, but confidentiality is utmost important to us, and wanting you to understand as well as a business owner, if you are looking to get a broker's opinion of value done or engaged with us so that we can do a broker's opinion of value, tell you what the most probable selling price is. If it makes you more comfortable, we do have a confidentiality agreement that we can sign, saying we're not going to say anything about your business, and the financials that you're going to give us are just going to stick with us, So we're willing to sign a confidentiality agreement up front. There is a clause at the very end that says that if you list the business with us and we take it to the market, that the confidentiality agreement is null and void, and obviously we have to do that because then we have to pull the talk about the business. But we want to let you know we're protecting your confidentiality at all times.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Boss Talk. My name is Carey Sobel. On behalf of my partner Jim Parker, we hope you will tune in to the next episode and learn about selling businesses with us.
Thank you very much.